the ultimate dream of these people, these bankers who were running the show, is a cashless society. Why would that be? If the banks deal with cash and lending of cash and everything, why would they want a cashless society? It's because cash is power. But what if you had the power without the cash? You can go directly to the power and you don't need cash. What if there's no cash? You just have power. Pure, raw, political, economic power over people.
Hey, StockPulse family, welcome back. Today, I have a really special treat for you guys as we're getting ready to go to the Silver Symposium here in about 22 days. This is a honored keynote that we're bringing to you guys. But before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe for StockPulse as we continue to bring updates about who's going to be speaking and what's going to be occurring. I am not going to introduce him. I'm going to let him go at it.
Hi, I'm Ed Griffin. And it's my delight and pleasure to tell you that I'm going to be presenting at an upcoming event that you all know about. And it's held on September 29th. And it'll be at the Caesar's Palace. How about that? I'll give you a little rundown of what I'd like to talk about. And I think it's probably something that you all would like to get my thoughts on anyway. First, I'd like to talk about what we know about the creature from Jekyll Island. We know a lot about it, but most, I say we, I mean those of us that have studied it, but most people have not studied it. And so the average American, and certainly the average person in other countries around the world, they know very little about this creature from Jekyll Island. They don't even know why it's called from Jekyll Island. They don't know that the Federal Reserve System, which is the topic, of course, that they don't know that the Federal Reserve System was created at a highly secret meeting on Jekyll Island, a real island off the coast of Georgia back in 1910 actually, and the Federal Reserve System was actually passed into law in 1913. So that the period between 1910 at this secret clandestine meeting where the top bankers of the United States with representatives from banking dynasties around the world in secret created the Federal Reserve System, but it was not passed into law until 3 years later. We'll talk about all of those things in whatever time permits. And when we're done with that, you'll understand that the Federal Reserve System is not what you think it is, probably. It's not even a bank. It has no reserves. It has nothing to do with the federal government. All those words are trick words.
I had no idea that was actually real. When I started mining Bitcoin, and that's why I heard about you, is they told me that the dollar was good and I was trying to save it and do the right thing in college, and I did college and I loved it. And then I started mining Bitcoin and I came out and I learned about what is happening with our monetary system. And then we started learning about the creature from Jekyll Island. And I don't like horror movies. I kind of stay away from them. So the book didn't really take to my liking until I couldn't stop. You had to just open the book, and I did. And then you realize this is a real place, a real thing happened. This is not made up. It's substantiated by facts, historical facts, documented facts. How can you unsee it? And at this point, I start turning around asking people, like my parents, why did you guys not do anything? Like, how come no one knew? Where were you guys? Like, he was there. I saw your videos on YouTube. They were there. You were out there talking to people. Were they just not listening? And in this age of social media, that's why I want you here. I think my friends need to hear the truth. They have no idea that Jekyll Island was a real place.
That's true. Well, I've often said I've never met a con artist that I didn't trust. And so you apply that to politicians and bankers as well. I've never met a really nice, successful politician that convinced me that he was sincere, or I've never met a banker who's so concerned about security and honesty. I've trusted those people because they put on such a good show of conscientiousness, But once I got into the study and found out what these guys actually did behind closed doors and the systems they created for us that we're not supposed to know about, then my attitude about life really changed at that point. So anyway, I'll be talking about that. And then after we're through talking about what we know about the creature from Jekyll Island, we might talk a little bit about what we know or don't know about the creature from Davos, Switzerland. Now, that's where the World Economic Forum holds its annual meetings. And these are also highly secret meetings. They're not secret in the terms of that they happen, but they're secret in terms of what goes on inside. Nobody's allowed within a half a mile of that hotel where they have those meetings held anyway. And they don't talk about it outside, but the head financial and political figures from all the major countries of the world meet at that conclave, and they discuss what they're going to do, how they're going to shape the upcoming world. So we talk about first the world the way it really is, and then we'll talk about the world the way they want to make it and are in the process now of making it. And that's the creature from Davos. And then we'll talk about the ultimate goal. That's sort of a leading in a subject. What is this thing they're trying to build? And we'll discover that the ultimate goal of these bankers and their puppet politicians, and let me pause for a moment on that wild statement, the puppet politicians. I used to think that the governments regulated the banks. And then when I discovered how much power the banks had with the creation of money and even creating money for the government now, I realized that no, the governments don't regulate the banks. The banks regulate the governments, and nobody knows that unless you really study it. So we'll see what this ultimate thing is that they want to build globally. Why are they destroying, and we'll talk about that, the fact that they are destroying the Federal Reserve System. They're doing it on purpose. It was going to fall apart anyway, of course. They knew that. So they figured now is the time, and they always destroy something that's in place and working pretty well, only if they have something better in their mind, as our present authorities and leading figures like to say, build back better. That's the slogan. They have something better in mind than even the Federal Reserve System. We'll talk about that. We know, here's a clue what they want, and the ultimate dream of these people, these bankers who are running the show, is a cashless society.
Yeah.
Why would that be? If the banks deal with cash and lending of cash and everything, why would they want a cashless society? Interesting question. But we see that they indeed do want a cashless society. And here's another hint, is because cash, everybody knows cash is power. But what if you had the power without the cash? You can go directly to the power and you don't need cash. What if there's no cash? You just have power, pure, raw, political, economic power over people. And
that's exactly what they're trying to do with the CBDC.
That's it.
Man, I can't wait to have this.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm on a show with you right now. I can barely stop smiling. I'm sorry if it's unprofessional, guys, but gosh, I'm talking to G. Edward Griffin. And if you guys have not liked, shared, and subscribed at this point, especially to StockPulse, as we start valuing things in Satoshic value, these are the things that are coming. And they are trying to trick you and imitate Bitcoin. And they are releasing CBDCs. Okay, let's keep going. It's your turn.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this is interesting of a cashless society. Why would bankers want to become, in charge of a cashless society when that eliminates banks? And in fact, it does, to everyone's surprise, when you find out that that's what they're designing. You perhaps noticed, go down to your major bank and they're redesigning most of them. Used to be you'd go in and there'd be long counters and you'd line up, and now, no, they have a few windows now, and most of them are little booths where you go in and sit down and talk to somebody about investments and so forth.
Or even the post office, they have a QR code reader now instead of a barcode. They're getting ready for digital payments.
Right. Yeah, they're trying to get rid of cash, and we'll talk about why that is and why we must not let it happen. And then we'll talk about the fact that this has become possible only now. For the first time in history, they've always wanted a cashless society, but there was always some way for people like you and me, all the diehards, to go find another way of paying for something. We could work with gold or silver or maybe Disneyland books or something, anything that people valued. You could swap it for something else, and
Correct.
You had a sort of a crude monetary system at work. But all of a sudden, technology makes it possible for the first time to allow only one thing to be used as a medium of exchange, which is the definition of what money is. So it's the difference between cash and money. Only one thing to be used as money and they will control it. In fact, it won't even be yours. Like your money is your money. You go to the bank. It used to be you deposited your money into the bank. And it was still your money, even though the bank was the guardian of it. And you had the right to go to the bank and say, I demanded my deposit to be returned. That's why they call them demand deposits instead of time deposits, because you could go in and demand it. It's your money. I don't know how many people attending this event that you're talking and going to have about and talking about there, Patrick, how many people know it, but it's not your money even now. They've very quietly and secretly passed some laws, didn't reach the newspapers very much, but now that money is legally considered to be the bank's money. You have not deposited it in the banks. You have invested it into the banks, like you would buy some shares of General Motors stock. It's no longer yours. And I just noticed the other day, I wanted to make a bank transaction and move I thought it was a modest amount of money for small business transaction. And they said, this exceeds your daily quota for moving money out of your account. I said, what? Since when am I limited in how much money of my money? Of course, I stopped to realize, of course, it's not my money. So now the banks already are regulating how much cash you can convert your deposits into. And that's only going to get worse. And it's all because of the technology that's now possible. And now we're talking about your field of expertise, Patrick. We're talking about the cryptocurrencies, the digital currencies, I should say, because there's nothing crypto about any of these current, or most of them. They're not crypto at all. They're just digital, like credit card money. We've already got digital money if that's the big deal, and it isn't. But people want that secrecy part, and that's the difficult part. And the sovereignty part, they want the ownership part, and it's going to be very difficult to maintain those aspects of it with digital currencies. And I'm glad you're going to be talking about how they can actually do that. And then we'll talk about scenarios. What about the future? What can be done about it? What'll happen if we don't do anything at all? Just wait and see how it turns out. That's what I would call the pessimistic scenario. And then we could talk about the realistic scenario, which is it's not the optimistic scenario, because forget the optimistic scenario. They don't happen. The realistic scenario is what we want to work on, the things that we can make happen and realistically do. It may not be as good as the optimistic scenario where everything goes away and we don't have to pay any price and that we go back to our Dancing with the Stars routine again. But a realistic scenario is one that I talked about in my book, A Creature from Jekyll Island. It's painful, but it's at least is a possibility. It's like a drug addict that has a serious addiction. It's very hard to get rid of his addiction. Very painful, and sometimes it's even impossible to do. A lot of drug addicts die in the process of trying to break their habit. But if those that do make it, it can be done. It's very difficult to do, and there's a huge price to pay. That's the scenario we should be looking at, the one that's realistically possible. And then finally, we may talk about something else, which is sort of at the root of all of this, even deeper than money. And that is a philosophy of social order, how we deal with each other. Under what conditions are we allowed ethically to use force on each other, to force them to do something or not to do something? At what point are we ethically allowed to kill someone, for example? We'll talk about, yes, that's always possible, because you can always, you won't be found guilty of murder if you kill someone who's trying to kill you, and it's clear that they were trying to kill you and all you did was try to defend yourself. So to kill someone by itself is not necessarily the end of the argument. You want to know the conditions under which force is used and lethal force is used. And that's a very fundamental discussion that almost never takes place in schools and courses on government and civics. They always assume that if you win the election, you win. You can do anything you want. You won the election. They believe that democracy is the winner takes all. If you can get 51% of the vote, brother, you can do anything you want to. And that's a huge mistake. We'll talk about that on my final segment if we have time. And that's this debate between, or this conflict between, one more word, this chasm between collectivism and individualism. If we have time to cover all of those things, I'd be surprised. But as you can see, we have a lot of good stuff to chew on. And I hope to see you on September 29th And that'll be at the Caesar's Palace, and we'll have fun. I'll see you then.
Mr. Griffith, I'm just so thankful that you came on, because the reality is, for me, is we are bridging this differently. Like, you are someone to us that we need to start looking to our elders and respected leaders. And what you said earlier about the drug addicts, that really hit me hard, because I understand that. But I also understand that people who come out of that come out stronger and can help more people than they ever thought that they could, because now they understand it fundamentally in a way that's different, and they can help their community. So for me, I agree with you. I am excited to come and figure out how we can do something different as a community, open eyes, change hearts, and let's start doing something different.
Exactly. And that lesson, unfortunately, has to be relearned. When our founding fathers, I'm speaking now for the American market here, when our founding fathers won the American Revolution, they, in a sense, were like, when it came to money, they were, in a sense, like drug addicts, because the colonies and the entire, all of the colonies together were printing money like mad on printing presses.
Mm-hmm.
They were just IOUs. And of course, inflation was rampant, thousands of %. People were wiped out. But it was all done in the name of fighting and winning a war. It often happens that in wartime, people don't worry about logic or constitutions or anything like that. All they worry about is winning. Yeah. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what the price is. We've got to win, because otherwise we lose. And so that's why tyrants always like wars, because they can do things and the people won't object, because it's the war, or it's the something else that's equally bad, like, it's the pandemic, or it's or something else, or the terrorists, or maybe the next thing will be, it's the aliens, it'll be something that people will, we're not going to question whether it's constitutional or logical, or whether we can afford it or not. We just got to do it. Those are the tricks that tyrants have learned to use in modern times, to make people passive and complacent and acceptance to their tyranny, because they're afraid of losing the war. So anyway, we'll talk about all those things. And when our founding fathers came out of that war, they had this lesson burned in their minds, because their economy was pretty well destroyed. And so they wrote those clauses into the Constitution that they thought were strong enough to prevent that from happening again, from governments issuing fiat money and using credit as money. But the lawyers in our midst and the future politicians forgot that lesson. That no longer was burned into their brain, and they figured that it would be a good idea to print money and make as much of it as you wish. And then the Federal Reserve came along and it codified that whole concept into law. And by this time, there are several generations away from the Revolutionary War, and people had forgotten the lesson. So now here we are, having to learn it again. And I'm hoping that out of this, with hopefully people writing some books like mine and some that are better than that, and warning the future generations, don't make that mistake again. We already made it twice. Twice is enough. And that's maybe I should write a book called Twice is Enough and use that as the theme. We should learn these lessons the second time at least.
Man, for you guys who have not enjoyed this conversation, I don't know how you haven't, because this is the kind of stuff that I live for. Mr. Griffin, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for coming to the event. And I look very forward to having you and hosting you and just spending some time with you face to face, signing books. And I'm so excited. This is going to be a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you for being persistent. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person there. So see you later.